Good afternoon, everyone. And, thank you for joining us for this very promising session, our first keynote lecture for this event, the work group, the WARCnet meeting. It is my utmost pleasure to introduce the speaker of this keynote lecture, Professor Simone Natale. Simone is an associate professor at the University of Turin, and he also holds a position at the Loughborough University in the UK, where until recently he was program director for the university's communication and media undergraduate programs. His main areas of interest are media history and digital media. He completed his PhD in communication studies at the University of Turin, Italy in 2011, and has researched and taught in numerous international institutions, including Columbia University in New York, Humboldt University Berlin, and the University of Cologne in Germany, Concordia University in Montreal in Canada. He's the author of a monograph called Supernatural Entertainments, Victorian Spiritualism and the Rise of Modern Media Culture, published with Pennsylvania State University Press, 2016. And he published numerous peer-reviewed journals, including Journal of Communication, Media and Society, Communication Theory, Media Culture and Society, and Media History. He was awarded research fellowships by world-leading institutions such as the Humboldt Foundation and Columbia University's Italian Academy. He's assistant editor of Media Culture and Society. And Simone's new book, titled Deceitful Media, Artificial Intelligence and Social Life After the Turing Test, is forthcoming in March 21 at Oxford University Press. So Simone, thank you so much for being with us this evening. And without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anat, and thank you all for inviting me to join this meeting and to present here. I'm very happy to be here in a group that is working on such an interesting topic and that has done such amazing work on this. I'll share my screen. Can you confirm that it's working? Good. Okay. So I'll start with an anecdote. In 2017, the robot Sophia, which was produced by the company Hanson Robotics in Hong Kong, was granted citizenship in the country of Saudi Arabia. Reports underline that Sophia was implementing the most advanced AI technologies, and also that he was able to learn social skills through interactions with people. But not all reports were so sympathetic with Sophia. Jan LeCun, for instance, who at the time was the director of artificial intelligence research at Facebook, pointed out that Sophia was to AI as prestidigitization is to real magic. In other words, he claimed, it's complete bullshit, pardon my French. So LeCun noted that what made Sophia so convincing to many was not much its clever programming or its computer power, but rather external features such as its appearance that was human-like and also its humanized voice. In this sense, LeCun's comments remind us that AI works not only through its technology, not only through the internal functioning of its algorithms, but also by mobilizing and also manipulating to some extent the perception of people who observe or interact with AI software. So people, in fact, are ultimately the ones who decide if to attribute things such as intelligence, agency, or life to any given technology. So now you might be asking, but what does this have to do with web archives? And you're right that so it looks at first glance so distant with our core concerns here. But I hope you will offer me, at least for the moment, the benefit of the doubt, as I will try to mobilize discussion in different areas of digital media studies as a way also to reflect on web historiographies. And in particular, what I will try to do is to point to the discussions, ongoing discussion about the so-called lives of digital objects, and try to show that these can be made central also to reflections on the historiography of digital media, including the web. As I will try to do that, I'll use the metaphor of stairs. I will go up from one step to the other as I look at different areas within the broad areas of digital media studies and historiography. And on each step, I will bring some the same baggage, the same bags with me, which is this concept of the lives, this concept and metaphor of the life that I will use to advance this reflection. In the talk, I'll draw from preliminary findings in a Nature Sea-funded project that I'm PI on, which is entitled Circuits of Practice and explores the role of museums in narrating histories of computing and digital media. This is a project still ongoing that I'm carrying out with other researchers, such as including Ross Parry and Katrina Foti, and also with a quite wide range of partners in the UK, in Italy, in the US, and in Japan. So, but let's move our foot towards the first step of my presentation, which points to the case of AI. So in the initial example that with which I opened the talk, I pointed to the fact that this robot, Sophia, was perceived as strikingly alive by many observers. What does it mean, however, to say that a robot or an AI software is alive? Well, the answer to this question may vary depending on the interpretative framework that we adopt to answer such questions. If we take, for instance, the framework of posthumanism, which proposed to expand the subjectivity beyond the human species, challenging anthropocentrism, then claiming that robots and AI are alive might be equal to claiming that AI and robots should be attributed like humans. Such an approach, however, has some key problems. In particular, if we recall also Lecan's comment about Sophia, what makes a technology so more or less human is not only, and perhaps not especially, how it works internally, but how it is perceived and so reacted from by humans themselves. Which makes, in my opinion, a different interpretative framework more productive to answer this question about what it means to say that robots and AI are alive. This framework is the social life of things framework, which was developed originally in cultural anthropology by scholars such as Appadurai and Gell. According to this point of view, things are attributed social meanings by people, and it's people that make things, including digital media, into social actors by introducing them within social structures. In this sense, if we take this point of view, the answer to this question is different. It means that digital objects do not have much lives on their own, but rather they acquired such lives through their inclusion in social and cultural networks and structures. It is, in other words, also people who project attributes give life to these objects. Let's make, for instance, an example of voice assistants. How do voice assistants such as Amazon's Alexa or Apple Siri work? Well, of course, on the first hand, they work through different AI technologies, including natural language processing that allows them to sometimes to find relevant answers to users' queries, and other algorithms such as, for instance, in the area of voice recognition, voice processing. But they also work through a different, another dynamic. They also work by mobilizing user projections and imagination. For example, the gender that is attributed in many of these tools by the company through different hints, the humanized and again gendered voice that they employ, the name that they are given, the inclusion of irony and other cultural and social behaviors in their conversation that is programmed into the machines. All these aspects serve to also to mobilize and to stimulate particular reactions and perception from the users that helps these tools work better because it helps user to accommodate them more easily into their everyday life and into their domestic environment. Similar discourse can be made not only for AI or voice assistant, but also more broadly for the social lives of digital objects. Brenda Rohrer famously pointed out that, quote, a computer-based representation without a human participant is like the sound of a tree falling in the proverbial uninhabited forest, unquote. And in this sense, we might point out that humans project, instill lives to digital objects in different ways, through interaction, but also through narrative and storytellings, courses on AI in shaping also our perception and our interaction with these tools. And also another element, also the emotions. Think of the anger that one might feel towards a computer with malfunctioning, or also of other emotions that are related to the passing of time, such as nostalgia. And just because I mentioned this issue of time, let's take this chance to do a further step up and go to the second step of my presentation, which looks at this concept that we've seen, this concept of social and cultural lives from the perspective of museums and how they handle digital heritage. Digital heritage might be defined as computer-based materials of enduring value that should be kept for future generations. Of course, this definition might be problematic. Also, for instance, for the meaning, and we might discuss on the meaning of the issue of value here. But let's keep this aside for the moment, as we focus on a different question. If digital objects have cultural and social lives, which are attributed by people through interactions, storytelling, and emotion, as we have seen in the previous step of the presentation, how can such lives be preserved and also communicated across time? To answer this question, I focus on the case of museums. Why museums? Because museums are placed in a particular position towards this question. Museums, in fact, face at the same time a double challenge. On the one side, the challenge of collecting and preserving history of computing and digital media. More and more institutions are doing that at the moment. And of course, as we all know, this entails a lot of specific problems and complexities. Think, for instance, just about the difficulties of collecting and preserving software. But then the museum also face a second challenge, which is the challenge of preparing such objects and such history, such elements of such histories for present and future exhibition. And the second challenge also has many problems and complexities, because it is hardly enough when you want to exhibit some of these objects to just put them on a shelf, as in these objects become relevant, understandable, significant. Curators have employed different strategies, which include also the web. Computers live again. Just let's take a few examples of the different strategies that have been employed. For instance, in an exhibition entitled Interface Experience, which was held at Bard Gathering Center in 2015, the curator decided that it was important to have visitors be able for visitors to be personal computers that were presented in this exhibition. As the curator of the exhibition, Simone Natale, pointed out, the computers must be used, thought about, and related to as platforms for dynamic interactive experiences. For this is really what the experience of this object is about in our daily life. Natale thought that because this is true in the use of computers, this is also to be true when we take computers as historical or historiographical objects. Another interesting example is an exhibition that was organized by Science Museum, which is one of our partners in the Security of Practice project that was dedicated to data. Here we have a different example also of an object which is harder to be offered for interaction to visitors of a museum. This object, one of the exhibits in this exhibition was a data server rack that was provided by Facebook for this exhibition to the Science Museum. There were some interesting discussions between the curators and the Facebook.
Excuse me, can I interrupt you for a second?
Facebook, the object show as it was, it would appear and so there. They introduced some LEDs. They weren't in city. Hearing? Are you hearing me?
We could barely hear you.
Sorry, just heard something. Is there a problem?
Yes, we could barely hear you before.
Just
perhaps
since the start of the presentation.
Not the entire presentation, but perhaps the part starting about the museums, if that's possible. And
all
perhaps, right. Perhaps if you could switch off your video, that would make the quality better.
Yes. Okay, I'll try that.
Yeah, sorry.
All right, I'll try again. No, don't worry. It should be. Wait, I'll just. Apologies for that. It might be my my line. So I'll try to share again. Can you hear me now? And can you see the presentation?
Yes, and we can see the presentation. Thank you.
Where should I start? Here?
I think
maybe jump to the number 15 wine museums. I think it was around there it went wrong. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Apologies again for the problem. So I was saying, why do I take museums to answer as case to answer this question? Because museums are in a particular position. They face, in fact, a double challenge. On the one side, the challenge of collecting and preserving histories of computing, which is, as we know, something full of problems and complexity. So think of the difficulty of collecting and preserving software, for instance. And then, but they also face a second challenge, which is the challenge of preparing these objects for a potential present and future exhibition. And the second challenge also has its own problems and complexities. In fact, it is not enough to show these objects on shelves, like as in the picture here, to make these objects relevant, understandable, and significant to visitors of an exhibition. In a way, curators, for this reason, have employed and developed different strategies to make, so to say, computers live again. To make, in other words, these objects related to the history of computing and digital media relevant and understandable to visitors. I'll take some example just to show some of the strategies that curators employed. An exhibition entitled The Interface Experience, which was held at Bard Graduate Center in 2015, for instance, took up the following strategy. They decided that all personal computers that were shown in the exhibition should be usable and able to interact by the visitors. As the curator of this exhibition pointed out, the computers must be used, thought about, and related to as platforms for dynamic interactive experiences. For this is really what the experience of this object is about in our daily life. So Keramidas was believing that because this is how computers are used and interacted in daily life, also when the computers become historical and historiographical objects, a similar approach has to be taken. Another interesting example is from another exhibition, which was organized by the Science Museum, one of our partners in the Secrets of Practice project in 2016. This exhibition focused on data and featured, among other objects, exhibits, a data server rack that was provided by Facebook to the Science Museum. There were some interesting discussions between Facebook and the Science Museum about this object. In fact, Facebook, there was a preoccupation, especially by Facebook, that this object, if exhibited as it was, would appear motionless and, so to say, dead to visitors. So they found an escamotage. They used these LEDs, these blue lights that you can see in the picture, so that this could simulate the circulation of data in the data server rack. And this was used as a way to make this more relevant. Are you still hearing me?
Yes, we are.
I take up that all is okay if you don't answer.
No, we're all okay.
Another interesting example is, oh, wonderful. Okay, thank you. Another interesting example is in California. which focused on software, the objects to be shown in a museum, decided to focus on 7 pieces of software that ranged from Photoshop to a video game to a car crash simulator, which is the one that I developed here. And they used, instead of choosing one single strategy to in a way to make these objects alive in the exhibition, they used a range of strategies, which included the testimony of developers and users that were introduced through videos, but also with the guided tours, material objects related to these different pieces of software that were presented in the exhibition, also visual documents, media text, and visualization of data that was also presented, aspects of the technical dimension that was illustrated to visitors in textual and visual ways. And finally, they also introduced some interactive experience, some digital-based ones, like in the exhibition of the by Pyramidas mentioned before, so that the software, and also some ways to interact also with some of the material objects in the exhibit. This is me so that when I was in the last time at the museum. So to summarize, curators in these museums employed different practices and strategies, and each practice could focus in different degrees on the specific object themselves, on the interactive experience, or on a specific narrative of message that was wanted to be conveyed through the exhibition. But all of these practices and strategies might be seen as corresponding to the need of restyling the social and cultural lives in the sense that we discussed before in the first step of the presentation, so that these objects could be relevant and understandable to visitors. And let's move now our foot one step ahead to the third and final step of our stair, which goes to the very core of our preoccupation, our concerns here, which is web archiving and historiography. In the previous 2 steps, I introduced the issues, the framework of social and cultural lives of objects, and I have shown how these can also be relevant to reflections about the historiography of digital objects. In this sense, we can see that preserving, reconstructing, representing the social and cultural lives of computing technologies, including the web, can be seen as one of the objectives of digital media and web historiography. It is interesting to see that exactly this objective that I just mentioned is relevant to many of the key challenges that are faced by web archiving, as you know much better than me. I will what are, of course, very lively. For instance, the fact that the web is an extremely historical record, where, for instance, at a certain moment dead is not often easy to reconstruct through the historical record. Another challenge is the fact that the web is an ever-changing context that is stored into a static object at a particular moment of time. And then the loss of the dynamic and engaged nature of activity in the web, for instance, through social media. Another challenge is the lack of searchability, which changes the condition and the dynamics of access, and the difficulty to reproduce the interactive experience at both hardware and software level. Just to present a couple, so of course, the conversation is wide, is broad, but just to present a couple of quotes also research in this regard. Anna, for instance, pointed out in 2016 that the question remains whether archived websites are appropriate primary sources for web historiography when they're detached from the live web. And Niels, quote, what is missing in a web archive is specifically the kind of usually offers us.
I think we've lost you. We lost the presentation and your voice.
It's strange because it looks like he's talking. Oh, there we go.
Hi, I'm very sorry for that. Is there some issue again?
It's apparently a very unstable connection. But we lost you around the quote from Anat. Still a little bit bad, I would say.
Okay, when did you lose me?
I think we can just try to continue, see what happens, because you probably can't change your internet connection now, right? So we'll try to continue and see.
Are you here now?
Yes, we can
hear you now.
Yes.
I'm very sorry. All right. Should I try again, or should we again the room? Huh? I'll try to leave and re-enter the room again.
Okay, we're waiting for you.
Okay, so.
Nice. Sorry, everyone, but this is understandable. This is part of having a virtual conference, so please bear with us.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
I'm very sorry for this. So I'll move again.
Understandable. We completely understand, and we all have circumstances, and we know you're not at home. So we'll make do with what we have, and we're very pleased with what we've heard so far.
Okay, so I'll continue now. So, we were here, and I was reading Anat's quote. Then also another relevant quote is from Niels, also points to similar problems already in 2013, who claims that what is missing in a web archive is specifically the kind of information about the web that the web itself usually offers us when we study the online web, such as search results and other information about what the web looks like here and now, unquote. So all these challenges can be seen also in relationship with this issue of social and cultural life. So in this sense, one question that we might ask is to what extent the work of web archiving can help reconstruct and represent different lives of its objects, similar to how museum curators instill life to digital objects that are inserted within their collections and exhibitions. Asking such a question would entail also facing and addressing two separate but at the same time interconnected issues. On the one side, how to preserve traces of the lives of digital objects on the web, and on the other side, also how to potentially represent these lives in the future. For instance, exhibiting and presenting the past of the web so that its social and cultural meanings are still visible. And now we have reached the top of our stair, and when you reach the top of the stairs, you can either go down or fall downstairs. So what does it mean to preserve the web after all? Well, I am aware that I offered more questions than answers here. And so what in this modest and contribution that my presentation can bring is to maybe to bring especially this question: how do the questions asked by research web archives relate to questions that are made in discussing different areas in digital media studies and historiography? And I tried to make to look in particular at the issue of the social lives, and with the device of the stairs, I moved from different areas. And of course, stairs can be going one way from down to up, but also the other way from up to down. So one might also ask, what is the contribution of work on web historiography for other areas of digital media studies? Of course, the contributions are many, but related to this issue specific of this idea of social and cultural lives, I feel that web historiography can help challenge rigid understanding of machine culture that obliterate the complexity of the relationship between humans and technology. Finally, just as a close to the presentation, I'd like to offer a small proposal of a kind of exercise in imagination. What if we try to imagine how would a future curator employ the materials in web archives to present to museum visitors of the future, maybe in 10, in 20, or even in 50 years, what the web was like in 2020? Maybe by asking such a question and by finding some tentative answer to this, we might help create better infrastructures and strategies to preserve the World Wide Web. Many thanks for your attention, and especially under these complicated conditions. Thank you. Was it clear at the end, more or less all parts?
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation, and especially the link that you made between your project and your argument, and taking that and bridging that to questions that concern us about web archives is especially appreciated. I think this notion of life and death of websites is something that does concern us a lot. I think also here among this network. Neil's concept, for example, of web archives as reborn digital objects, as opposed to born digital objects, is another example, I think, of the presence of these metaphors in how we think of web archives, and as freezing the lives of a live website. We use the term live website versus archived website. So all of these projections and metaphors are very present in discussions on web archives, but also the questions of preservation and how to incorporate the cultural lives, the interpretations, the meanings, the experiences of people. These are things that are difficult to address at the moment with web archiving more generally. I remember a project, Niels, if I'm not mistaken, by the Royal Library in Denmark, that tried to capture how people were to document how people were engaging in double screen.
Second Life. Oh, no, I don't know if that was that. Sorry.
Yeah, so this question of the people at the end of these computerized machines are actually missing from web archives. So with that remark, I'm opening the floor for questions from you. And we have a question from Niels. Niels, would you like to ask it yourself?
Yes, I can do that. I was just wondering the difference between the two steps you make. I think it was just, it's an interesting question about bringing the past to life today or even in the future. But you talked about in the second step about computers, and you showed this rack or this shelf with computers. That's tangible objects, and that's usually what museums preserve. But what is in a web archive is not an object. It's, or you could say it's an object, but it's more text, it's more semantic stuff. So I was just wondering what this difference means between bringing museum tangible objects to life and then bringing text to life in a way. It's basically a question about, you could say, about the difference between museums and libraries, in a sense.
Oh, thank you. This is a very interesting question, and so it is true, of course, that archives and museums are very separated, so institution in terms of objectives, practice, and so on. I believe that sometimes the overlaps between these institutions is sometimes understated, and also in the context of histories of the web and digital media, because we have a lot of institutions, museum institutions that actively collect aspects of the web and of digital media that. For instance, think about the Smithsonian, where the function of museum and the function also of archives are quite cross with each other. I would say that in a way, in my presentation, I presented the case of museums as relevant. Because it can help ask a different question about how we can then use the materials in archives. Although of course there is a big part of the web archives that can be treated as text, there is also a large part that cannot be treated as text alone, because also of the operability of a lot of web pages, and also the element of software in web archives.
Thank you so much for your answer. Karin, you had some comments?
Perhaps I just put it in the chat for Simone. My PhD was actually on Gell's theory as well, researching the social life of art on the web. So it's basically also looking at AI bots, but also different types of websites that have been collected by museums and how they then still have a social life, both outside of the museum and inside of the museum. And it's also using some web archives as well. And another paper I'm referring to is about re-exhibiting. So it's about how do you indeed re-exhibit those websites time after time so you can keep them alive in a certain way.
Thank you. This looks really interesting, and I'll read with very interest, a lot of interest. Thank you.
Valerie, you said you have a few questions.
Yeah, but I'm a bit, it's not so clear exactly what. So Simone will have to deal with it because it was so rich, and So many things I'm not sure I will be able to clearly explain. So feel free to interpret and reconstruct it, Simone. First thing was about, you mentioned gender, and if you have some elements for developing these gender issues, I will be interested. Another point is about this tendency to say, okay, we have to make born digital heritage alive, video games, computers, and so on. And I have the feeling we don't have the same way to act with other objects that probably should deserve also some kind of recontextualization or reconstruction. So how would you explain this specificity of computing, if this is one? Is this also the way in media, in telecommunication? And is this really something which is linked to the communication sphere, or is it something that I was thinking about, of course, cars and a lot of other artifacts? For example, you can drive a car within a museum, or I don't know in which museum you can do it. So I was wondering about our relationship with these communication technologies, and also about this tendency of public history, participation, co-shaping, and so on. I may imagine that this has a strong influence on the way we are also dealing with museology today and archiving and so on. And I was wondering if at one point it was not also interesting to have these objects as a really dead thing. First, for preservation, of course, challenges, because when a computer, an old computer is running, of course, its materiality is in danger, or so it's the first question. And also, to make these days and these laws, this oblivion more obvious, we could also imagine something which is absolutely not interactive, or these dead machines, and perhaps it's more something that net artists or others, or in media archaeology and so on, they have worked on this. So what is your feeling about this relationship? We have to reborn this thing to dead and making them alive. So I'm not sure it is very clear, but I hope you may provide some brilliant ideas on my naive questions. So
Thank you so much for these such stimulating questions. I'll try to answer. Hopefully, I will not forget the following ones while I talk. But the first question about the gender. Well, this was specifically on my work I've been done, and for my forthcoming book that is about AI, and especially communicative AI that enters in communication with users. It's programmed for that. And if you take, for instance, an example of voice assistants, there have been a lot of debates and controversies about the fact that voice assistants are presented with a specific gender, and this is signaled through voice, through names also, and so on, by different voice assistants. And so if one looks at the reason for this choice, one sees that basically companies have used studies about how people perceive different voices, and they've integrated these studies in their own design. And so, for instance, these are studies, of course, that can be very debatable, but the key thing here is that gender is taken as a key thing that can be constructed so as to create, to make some specific effects. Not only gender, of course, because for instance also class. Through a specific voice, for instance, you can convey a specific class and so on. So this was how this was here. Then you make the question about if I understood it correctly, about the role of communication in these technologies, and this is a very interesting question. And certainly, if we take, for instance, example of voice assistants, we see how much in this case projections, perceptions are important, because these tools are programmed to communicate with people. And so the fact that so they are also media communication makes this perspective of the socialized status even more crucial. And I would say that if we consider also the web, and so both as both the so-called live web and the historical record of the web, there are also many ways in which so machine also communicate with users. One interesting thing that I looked at in my research was how one chatbot, Eliza, which was the first chatbot ever created in the 60s by Joseph Weizmann at MIT, was revived in different websites on the web. There are several avatars of these chatbots that are often not so faithful to the original, but that are where users can interact also there with these chatbots. So there is an element of this communicative, and this is also what so this importance of communication is what also makes again also in the case of the web and online media so crucial the issue of how this is animating social lives and cultural lives. Then the third question, can you remind me?
There was one about absolutely wanting to make things alive again, and why not expose them totally dead? It's also a message about alterity, loss, oblivion, and so on. Of course, also the danger of making something, and especially for hardware, running, and we know that it may be bad for the machine, I would say.
Thank you, Valerie. That's also a good question, because so if we take, often metaphors are very useful because they are powerful. They can open up different reflections and pathways. At the same time, they also have the problem that sometimes they open too many paths and ideas. And so one thing is that if maybe these social and cultural lives of things, and as presented by scholars such as Appadurai, can be useful. At the same time, life is also a metaphor that a lot of people we use often to refer to many different things. Yeah. So I would say that if you take this approach by Gell and Appadurai, even a computing object is presented as dead. For instance, if you present a television in a museum as a garbage, as something that is old and obsolete and to throw away, then you are, in a way, you are activating a particular social life of these objects and a particular narrative of these objects. So it's not much the issue of obsolescence, but it's more, how you can reconstruct and represent so certain characters of how these objects are used, perceived, understood, narrated, talked about in our societies. I think that's.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Valerie.
I'm wondering if members who are web archivists would like to comment on how they perceive web archiving in relation to what Simone had said, compared to museums or the notion of curation, for example. Okay. Any other questions before we conclude this very intriguing panel?
Maybe if I can add just a small, returning a little bit to the institution discussion we had early on, because again, there is a difference between the museums and the libraries, that the libraries have the web archives. in the sense that the museums, they have to make exhibitions. So they collect the objects and they make exhibitions. But that's not the same case with the web archives and the libraries. They just collect the text, or whatever we should call it, semantic entities, but they don't have any obligation to exhibit them. And that's maybe where the researcher communities comes in, because that's what we could do. We could go, we should just be happy that the web archives have preserved as much as possible. And then we could start telling the stories and bringing all that to life, etc., etc. And the web archives may help us a little bit, because there is a discussion that was taking place within web archiving some 10 years ago about simulation. So one way of putting it to life is to simulate the old running environments of the websites from, say, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And you can actually do that on the website called oldweb.today. And you can actually go to the Portuguese web archive, search for any of their web entities, and then you can press the button, I would like to see this in the browser that fits, and in the running environment that fits this web archive or this website from, say, 1997 or something. So that's maybe just a little bit of the difference between museum and archive, and then the exhibition thing and simulation.
Thank you, Niels. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I don't want to bring together, two things that are clearly different. What I as a historian of digital media and media in general, I approached the environment of museums lately in this project that I've been running, and this actually, it was a way also to think about historiographies of digital media. So what I tried to do here wasn't much to say that museums and archives should do the same things, or that archives should follow the same challenges and objectives of museums. It was more about, from someone who's an outsider to both of these fields, to think about how these practices and work in these two different areas can, in a way, help stimulate questions that are relevant to each other. And the example that you point to is a good example. And when I pointed to this idea of the exercise of imagination, of thinking how a curator would create the web in 50 years and so on, this is exactly, I think, what you are also trying to think, that in a way that the record and researchers also in this group have been also feeding back to archive institutions insights on how these materials can be used, so that they can be really useful to reconstruct the full life. Let's use again this metaphor of the web. And this is something, in a way, that although in different ways, is common to both reflections that are making in museum and in archives. Different means, different objectives, but some common questions that are being asked. But I think you're right in this, and so it's a good point. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this session. To me, I think making this link between media history and media studies more generally with web archiving is a very important bridge that we can start taking as a web archiving and web archive research community. So for that, I'm very thankful to you for being with us today and for your inspiring talk. And thank you everyone for attending this session. We'll see you all tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.